moving from Christianity to Africanity. It doesn't matter which way we look at it, in whether way we accept it or not, and how we are moving away from colonization, because Christianity really speaks to our spirits being colonized. And so the move from colonization, whether we're moving from Christianity, whether we're moving from Islam, and starting to own our own spirituality and our own spiritual journey. And we also have the understanding now, as we dig deeper and we, as scholars, to find that the Christian story, or the story of the Christ, is actually an African story.
Well, I beg to differ a bit about that, because if you're looking at the Christ from biblical point of view, using Bible as a history, although the Bible is not a history book, it's a book of faith, purporting to detail a history of a certain group of people, which is the Jews or the Israelites. You find that the man they talk about in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, is a Syrian. He was a Syrian mystic who spoke Aramaic. Now, people will go to the descriptions of the color of the skin. That is, the Bible says his skin was bent like brass, his hair is like wool, his eyes are like flames of fire or brownish. Therefore, these are physical characteristics of a black person. But these are the same physical characteristics of Muammar Gaddafi. These are the same physical characteristics of Sai Baba of India. So basically, they are darker skinned people who are not necessarily African. Like you get them in South America, the Aztecs, the Olmecs. You get them in South India. You get them in the black Arabs themselves. Some will say the Prophet Muhammad's mother was a black Arab, or nevertheless an Arab. So there is some scholars who say the story of Christ is taken from Osiris from Egypt, and therefore this is, and they'll even go to the point of say Karasat or KRST from the hieroglyphics and say this is the Christ. But on the etymology, the context is different. Even though it was taken from Egypt, let's say, for interest's sake, it was taken from Kemet. But in Kemet, it was not called Jesus. In Kemet, it was not called Christ. In Kemet, they were not calling Osiris Christ. So some will come up with comparatives, like comparing Osiris, Horus, and Isis, and say is the Trinity, Father, Mother, and Child. But for me, this is far-fetched. And it's also a result of our colonization that even some of our people, when they are waking up to the African spirit and the African soul, they're still searching for the Christian God in Africa. So they go around and making Christian deities out of the African indigenous gods, so that they continue to fit into the narrative. But also, the African stories of spirituality is not patriarchal. So the biblical God is very patriarchal. Jehovah, and by extension his son Jesus, is very, very patriarchal story. It's very contradicting African spirituality. Actually, here in Africa, we started worshipping women before we worship men. Before we have male deities, we had feminine creative principles as our goddess. You can go to the Nguni cosmology. They talk about Menzi, which is basically Mdali, which is basically the energy of the universe, which is basically an androgynous force that is neither male or female, or that carries both male and female qualities in it. It's a force. It's not a person, Menzi. But then when Menzi is sent, the first principle is the principle called Ma, or Ninavanu Ma, which is the principle of nourishment, which is mother. And of course, naturally, every child who's born into this earth must have a mother, including Jesus, who might not have earthly father, but he has an earthly mother. Because we are born through the womb of the woman. You have to be carried in the womb. You have to be born to earth. So the first goddess that was given to us within our African cosmology is a mother. That is why we refer to this as Mother Earth, Mama Africa. Our language is mother tongue. It's not father tongue. So Father God, Father tongue, It's not our thing, you know. It's white people who come in, invade our land. They say this is their fatherland. That is a dichotomy of South Africa. The whites refer to this land as their fatherland. We call it our motherland. It's our motherland because we were mothered here, we are born here. And then it's their father's land because their fathers conquered it for them. The Jan van Riebeecks and so forth, they did conquer it for them. They are
not born into it.
They are not born into it. So we were born into it. So now, the story is very patriarchal, it's very chauvinistic in the narratives of the Gospels and so forth. So from the cultural practices that is expressed by this spiritual expression, one can see from the beginning that this is a non-African story. Now, when people are trying to fit it into the African story, now they come, and that is why in the Trinity they will say from Egypt is Osiris, Isis, and Horus, father, mother, child, but that's not a conventional Christian doctrine of Trinity. The conventional Christian doctrine of Trinity is Father, Son, Holy Spirit. There is exclusion of the mother. Yes, because that is the patriarchal origin of that. So we basically say these religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, these narratives are created by insecure men to control women. Hence, the first sinner in these stories is a woman. You know, if you go to the Old Testament, the first sinner is Eve. Then Delilah is demonized for cutting Samson's dreadlocks. Basically, she's blamed for Samson's stupidity because Samson had an agreement with God that his strength is in his hair and he must keep that as a secret between him and God. And he decided to reveal his secret to the woman. And then in turn, the woman is the one who shouldered the blame. You go to the story of Christ, they bring the woman, we caught this woman committing adultery. But adultery is an act that of two people. You know, so you don't see the men in the picture. And these people are willing and ready to stone this woman. Some of how Jesus talked to some of these women, like the Samaritan woman, and this other woman, I think she was begging for food. And then he said to the woman, we don't give what is to the children of Israel to dogs. You don't give that to dogs. And then she said, but the dogs also eat what fall from the master's table. So now when you follow the whole narrative, it's very patriarchal, it's very chauvinistic, it's therefore anti-African. That is why in our spiritual tradition, we talk about Thokoza Gogo. We talk about Uma, I just said. We talk about Nomkhubulwane. We talk about Jobela. We talk about feminine creative principles. As I say that in Africa here, in the very evolution of our story, spiritual culture, we were ruled by women. We had a high council of the mothers, which is made up of women above the age of 40. And these women were masters in traditional healing or African mysticism. So these are the same inventors of Ubuntu. Now, if you look at our laws of Ubuntu, their consequences are always mystical or magical. They will say, you must not eat lying down. You ask why, they said, you're going to develop breast from your back. This is obtagati. So our laws, so these mothers, they were masters of what the white men will say witchcraft, but it wasn't witchcraft because it wasn't designed to bewitch people per se. It was designed to bewitch the mind. Don't go and ask the salt from the neighbors at night. When the women are sweeping, you mustn't be sitting here. They're going to sweep if they sweep on your legs, you're not going to marry. So the consequences of breaking these laws were always magical or obtakati like. That this will happen and this will happen. So because the only medium that these mothers had to protect the society was obtagati, the fear of magic, not actual obtagati, but the fear of obtagati or the fear of magical consequences. Mind you, in Africa here we discovered magic before we discovered religion. So that's why most of our African religion are mystical. We were ruled by the Nyangas first. Our first rulers were healers. So in other tradition, probably their first rulers were priests, like Melchizedek and so forth. But here, our first rulers were great mothers who were traditional healers, who were people who were communicating with nature, herbs and everything. So today they say South Africa has the most beautiful constitution in the world. or the most advanced constitution in the world. But what protects this constitution? It is the NPA, it is the civil societies, it's the political parties, it's constitutional court, it's a whole lot of things that protect this. Now, what was used to protect the constitution of the mothers of the nation, which is Ubuntu? So they had no army, they had no MPA, no civil society, no political parties to protect their rules and their laws and the high laws of the Bantu. Now, then the only medium they had to protect this was a fear of magic, the fear of, if I don't do this, the consequences will be like this. If you do this, it's going to rain during your wedding day. So all of these things. Now, what will connect this with the rain? It's magic. So this magic was kept in our mind. So they bewitched our mind first to make us obey. They did not use the gun and the jail to make us fall in line. Hence in Africa we never had jails where we lock up people. The only people who will be locked up somewhere will be zombies. So we never had jails, we never had old age homes for the elderly people. So we never had these institutions to keep the people in line. We had the word of the mothers of the nation. So fundamental origin of our spirituality is feminine. So any religion that demonizes women, it is not our own.
When I came from the angle about Christianity being African-based, it was coming from the Kemetic teachings about Isis, Osiris and Her. Yeah. It was about that from that angle, and that is why we actually need to keep having this conversation. Yes. Because when we are looking, and I was going to spread it to bring it to Sintu, we would see how Christianity relates to Sintu. But we need to have these conversations because we move from one thing to the next thing, and we are not getting and being able to appreciate who we actually are, because we may be able to trace our origins from all sorts of places on the continent, and that is actually right, because there were no borders at the time of our ancestors. The borders are a new thing, and we can safely assume and know that our people used to live and roam and where they actually could, and it was determined by where there was water, where there was food together,
grazing.
Yes. So that was the nature of our lives. But now, with where we find ourselves after colonization, we actually, and after Christianization mainly for us, at this end of the continent, we're struggling to actually find ourselves. The identity crisis is actually so big that anything that smells Africa, we're latching onto. Anything that can tell a story different from the Christian story, we're latching onto as ours. And when I say ours and not ours, I'm speaking about us learning Zimu. We're moving from Christianity, and the two popular spiritual lifestyles now is Bungoma, and I see the Egyptian philosophy actually just really catching on, and I know why as well, why it is catching on, because we were actually really instrumental in that movement, making sure in just trying to avert the identity crisis, and also presenting an option to Bungoma. Because now people are thinking that the way to go to African spirituality is through Bungoma. So we were presenting another one, that here is another one that speaks of a documented history, whereas Bungoma is not documented, whereas Stories Sintu is also not documented. So it's a way of, we need to be able to bring about and show and educate on the different aspects of spirituality that existed down here. I'm going to, after having said that, I want to speak about Rastafarianism, because even in our heads, we view it as coming all the way from Ethiopia, and so I need you to actually educate us on that, and where it came from, why you subscribe to it, and also let's start with where it came from, and then we're going to go into also the principles of it. And what I loved also was the fact that you went into patriarchy, because I was actually going to bring that up, because it's a big thing, it's a big matter, and it's a big matter that hinders our spirituality. Thokozani.
Well, it is true what you're saying, that in moving away, and we need to clarify these things, that and this is a challenge I'm also having in the interfaith space, that whenever they say African traditional religion, they bring in Abu Gogo to come and perform rituals. And but African spirituality, it is not only Abu Gogo. The Abu Gogo, they are just one of the specialists in African spirituality. There are several specialists. You have African traditional religion practitioners who are not necessarily traditional healers. Like you have the Inkolo Institute in the Eastern Cape. You have Amaku Institute of Dr. Noguzolo Mdende. You have Professor Mokhwachani in Limpopo. These are African traditional religion advocates or African spirituality advocates who are not necessarily traditional healers. I subscribe to African spirituality. How I pray, different from how the mainstream Rastafari pray. I use the ancient Basotho prayers, where I learned that there are certain prayers of rainmakers. There are certain prayers that deals with fertility. There are prayers that deal with the ancestors, to appease to the ancestors without necessarily slaughtering an animal and so forth. So basically there's still the third dimension that needs to be brought in, that is between Kemet and Obungoma, which is African, which is the part which I'm basically advocating, the part that I'm teaching within my own institute and so forth. Not everybody need Utwasa, Atwasela Idlozi. Not everybody need to Twasa to become a traditional healer. You know, we Twasa for many things, including our own awakening, our African awakening. So that we demystify the whole thing, because now with that we are also bringing another stereotyping of that, okay, if you are not a Christian, then you must be a Twasa.
Yes, we are closer.
Yes, Gogo. So now we need to clarify that, because there are many expressions of African spirituality. You have Moroka Pula, which is an African, what you call an indigenous priest, whose job is to Ubonga is giving is Tagazelo Sezulu. He's speaking to the heavens. So this is the realm of cosmologians, not theologians. So we're basically cosmologians. We speak to the cosmos, because we Africans are cosmologians, are not theologians. We don't have a written script, except what they are attempting to do with the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is not also an African Bible. Contrary to popular beliefs, that people think, okay, we had an older Bible called the Egyptian Book of the Dead. No, the Egyptian Book of the Dead was put together in 1886 by
a white guy,
Wallace Batch, which is basically the collection of scripts, funerary text, the papyri, that when people are being buried, that's always a papyri of Seti, papyri of Unefa, and so forth, different papyri. So they compiled them together and then came up with what they call the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But it is not a book that the Africans gathered spiritually like what people do in the church, and they started to read verses and chapters from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. There was no such thing. But these were papyri or text that whenever you are funerary text, actually, whenever you are being buried, they accompany you, so that when you then reach to the throne of Osiris, to the judgment scales, where they are going to weigh your heart with a feather, they also read your deeds. So it is actually the text where your deeds are written, the papyri where your deeds are written from. So ours is an oral tradition, mouth to ears, which you had different fraternities that deal with that, the storytellers. the keepers of umlandu, you know, the custodians of history. And then the oral traditionalist, like in West Africa, you'll get the griots among the Mande people. You have also the 3 category of griots, which are basically storytellers who are keeping the tradition through oral, from mouth to ears, from one generation to the other. So which also they were looking for particular individuals with a good memory to be these talking books. So we come from a tradition of the talking books, of library on legs, people who were good at memorizing things and passing them from one generation to another, who were fraternities, what the white people will call secret societies, that were entrusted as custodians of this particular knowledge system that they pass it. You have the fraternities of the hunters, the fraternities of the drum makers, the drums itself, the wood carvers. All of that have the story of the wood. What does this symbolize, and all of that. So these stories are passed on and on and on like that to our people. That was information being kept through word of mouth, because there was an obligation to this word of mouth. There was an obligation to tell the truth. This title is now remaining with the Zulu king Isilo Samabandla Wonge. They said Omulomo ngathethi manga, the mouth that doesn't lie.
That's what he came.
You see, so this were the mouth that did not lie. So don't know that this one, they are orators, they are good narrators, and they don't leave out details. So these were our talking books. This is how our spirituality was given. The people who taught me these ancient prayers, it is from mouth to ears, that they kept it from memory from as far as the beginning of time, from the evolution of these spiritual cultures. So that is the next dimension that we need to bring it in, of dealing with African spirituality without necessarily going Kemet, because Kemet is not the total summary of all that is as far as African spirituality is concerned.
We cannot move from Christianity to Kemet without even understanding what other options there are. The identity crisis is really a big deal.
Yes.
Because to decolonize our spirit, we need to understand the different where we actually come in, where our people came from, where the stories, as you put it, and the stories are really important in that. Those other things are, the reason is because all those other things are going to die out if we keep focusing on one thing. Leave the one to focus on another. We leave all of our other expressions to die, and this is our sole responsibility as the custodians. We are custodians because we are here. We have found that Spirit has led us to the different places that it has led us. You are where you are, I am where I am, and we are working and doing exactly the same thing, you know, and that is why we need to take on that responsibility to actually make sure that when we move on, when we pass on, we have left our children, we have left the community knowing that they are knowing of our spirituality, so that when they go out there and they're looking to find themselves, we're not only identifying as what our colonizer brought to us, we're not only identifying as also the things that we are being taught, or the things that are just out there. We need to identify as ourselves, so that, and to do that, we need to be able to know the differences. I spoke to you about, I asked you to bring up Rastafari.
Yes.
Because our Rastafari is very interesting, and it's an element that also seems to actually filter into many different kinds of African spirituality expressions. It keeps coming up. It comes up in the people that are interested in Africanism or Africanity actually find that their pathway will lead them through Rastafari at some point, and it will lead them to, and that's another thing that we are actually finding, is that we dabble and we dabble and we dabble, we do not commit. And not that there's anything wrong with actually with that actually, but the dabbling means that we get to learn bits and pieces off, but we do not
get the
totality of it. We do not get to experience it. We are just on the move.
Yes.
And we need to take on things not only as scholars as well. It's not the responsibility of scholars as well. It's the responsibility of people that need to grow spiritually, that need to be decolonized.
Rastafari is a response to colonialism and slavery. Rastafari, it is based on the Ethiopian king. His name is Rastafari. He was called Rastafari. He's born Tafari Makonnen. And then he became Lich Tafari. Is a royal title as a child born in the royal family, which basically means royal son. And then he became Dijazmak Tafari, which is another title, which is basically commander or the keeper of the door. And then he get Ras Tafari, which is head of an army and so forth. Ras Tafari, and then he became Negus Tafari, which is King Tafari. Negus is a Amharic, which is Ethiopic word for king. Negus, Negus. And then in 1930, he was crowned Emperor Haile Selassie. Now, Haile Selassie is a name he was given at the age of 40 days, where the Ethiopian children, through the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, when they are born, the male child at the age of 40 days must get their baptismal name. And then the female at the 80 days, they get their baptismal name. So he used his baptismal name, which is Haile Selassie, which means powerful Trinity. He used his baptismal name to as his regnal name, the name that is going to now rule with it, that he was given from the age of 40. Now, the Rastafari movement was then exploded or heralded in Jamaica from former slaves, Africans who were taken as slaves or stolen from the continent here and taken into slavery, which Jamaica was a big sugar plantation. So you will say it's a spiritual culture that was developed among former slaves from the plantation. Now, what they did, most of them around that time, there were this African awakening that we are going through. Then there was a script they wrote, they called the Holy PB, or the Black Man's Bible. Again, trying to move away from the white man's Bible. And then they come up with another one, the Parchment Scroll of Black Supremacy. This was a time now they were talking about Ethiopia is the only place in Africa that was never colonized. And then they were talking about prophecies of the Messiah will come out of Ethiopia. Now, when Rastafari was crowned, these elders, these forefathers of the movement, Leonard Howell, Archibald Dunkley, Robert Hines, and Joseph Nathaniel Hebert, they came out and said the crowning of Rastafari, Haile Selassie, is a fulfillment of a prophecy of the coming Messiah. That now the Ethiopian royal family have certain title from the days of King Solomon, when the Queen of Ethiopia, the Queen of Sheba, went to meet with King Solomon. And then the son of that union became the first Solomonic king of Ethiopia. So they carry the titles of the kings of Israel, King of Kings, Lords of Lords, Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah. So now when Rastafari was crowned in 1930 with all these titles, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Conquering Lion of Judah, his name means powerful Trinity. Trinity is God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. And here is a man whose name literally means powerful God, if you interpret it that way. And then they had this interpretation of the name Rastafari to mean Ras is head, Tafari means creator. That therefore Rastafari means head creator. So therefore they say this is the God we waited for, the head creator. Although Rastafari is a head to be feared, you know, the dreaded one, the feared one. But then their limited understanding of Amharic, then they knew Tafari to mean creator instead of one to be feared. For you to get a creator, it will be Fatari, like Fetret. This is like in Gaza, the original language. So they then said this man, whose name means the head creator, powerful God or powerful Trinity, King of Kings, Lord of Lords. This is the prophesied Messiah that the book of Revelation 5 talk about, that certain script in the Bible talk about. So this then intertwined an African rebellious spirit that was rebelling and revolting and responding to colonialism and slavery, using the Bible to rationalize this God-King concept. But the concept of the God King is not biblical. It's actually as old as Africa. The King of Babedi, our king, when the missionaries came there and then they tell them to convert the people to Jesus Kwati. Khosi Sukwati said, Khosi ke Modimo wa lefatshe. The king is the God of the earth. The pharaohs were God kings. The Kabakas in the Great Lakes region in Uganda, mainly our kings were seen as the representation of the heavens, like the Zulu, Shaka of the heavens, Shaka Zulu. They believe that he come from the heavens. He's a child of prophecy. He was born in the month of Ntuligasi, which is July. So therefore he was prophesied that there would be one sent by the heavens. There are some clips lately they've been going around that were taken from this Shaka Zulu movie that was made in the 80s. There is a conversation between Shaka and the missionaries. And Shaka said Jesus had to die so that the heavens must pass the power to me. And here KwaZulu, the only king of kings is Shaka, not Jesus. You understand? So they've always been that thing that our kings are divine rulers, are divine kingship. So the idea, therefore, of Rastafari, who is Haile Selassie, who is then the movement is named after, it brought in this idea of the God King, that the king is God, or God is a representative of God on earth. So therefore, then the movement was then called Rastafari. And then when you ask us, what is your way of life? Is Rastafari. What is your philosophy? Is Rastafari. What is your thinking? Is Rastafari. We are not Rastafarians and we don't practice Rastafarianism. So we don't have such an ism called Rastafari. So it's not an ism like communism, socialism. It's not an ideology. It's a way of life. It's an expression of a person. So we say we share a multiple personality with Rastafari. We are called by his name. We call upon his name. So our philosophy is Rastafari. But then it also suffered a Judeo-Christian overbearing through using the Bible. So to a great extent, certain aspect of it become anti-African. One of the most critics of Amangoma and Nyangas is the Rasta who read the Bible. So then came up until to our time, where we bring in our Africanity into Rastafari. We stop reading the Bible. We reject the biblical concept of Rastafari. We develop the African concept of it. We reject the idea that the Bible should be used as a final judge of all African cultures. You can't judge the African cultures based on the Bible. So now, what you have right now in the Rastafari movement, you have those who are gravitating to the African roots and therefore using African spirituality, African philosophy, African cosmology to articulate Rastafari. And then you have those who are using the Bible, who don't sound too different from the born-again Christians and their attitude towards things African. Yes. They hate everything.
Patriarchy.
And the patriarchy. Yes, and the patriarchy, because they are reading a patriarchal book. Exactly. Because of the Bible. So because of the subscribing to the Bible, then they become patriarchal and there are rules, woman must shut up in the church, things that are in the Bible. So most of their rules are shaped by the Bible, because also it come up with this thing that Haile Selassie was a Christian. So they felt like they have to be Christian themselves too. Now I always say to them that I consider him a God, and I consider that God belongs to no religion. But also in his own utterances, he said, yes, I'm a Christian, but as a king, I'm equally a Christian, a Muslim, and a pagan. Now I say that if it's all of that, is none of that. There's no way you can be a Christian, a Muslim, and a pagan at the same time. If you're all of that, you're none of that. So he was a diplomat, so he had a certain way of speaking. So in my view, that is his diplomacy now, rejecting religion and present himself above religion, because this is the problem that Africa is finding itself in now. We have kings who are Christians. we have kings who belong to political parties. There are two things a king does not belong to in an indigenous African society. The king cannot be religious, because the king is a custodian of the spirituality or the spiritual culture of the religion of his ancestors. The king cannot be like the king
cannot be a part of the ANC, for instance,
or ANC. Yeah. No, because you're going to divide the nation. In your nation, there are DA, there are EFF, there are ANC, and then here you are a king.
So you are
like what the Zulu king just did the other day. When they start to say, Cyril Ramaphosa is sent by God. In this mess that we are in, he's sent by God. Like what? Which God is that? For load shedding, you know, all of this type of thing. And now he's dividing the nation, because among his nation, you have a large population of his nation who are IFP. You have a large population of his who are EFF. I was listening yesterday, the Secretary General of EFS, Marshall Damini, saying KZN is for EFF, from Kwamhlaba Walingana to Kokstad. Nobody's going to tell them what to do, because there is this talk that the IFP, they're having issues with him. So you see, that itself divides the nation when the king is seen to be taking side in politics or in religion. Because the king, he's supposed to follow the religion of his ancestors, the founders of that Zulu throne, Malandela, or Senzangakhona, or Jama. All these men were not Christians, but they believed in God. They have a name for him, they call him Umenzi. That is why the titles of Shaka is Udumehle Zika Menzi. His divine titles, like what we are saying, the emperor is the king of kings and so forth. So now the king, therefore, eventually, for the rule of the nation, the Emperor Haile Selassie say, I'm equally a Christian, a Muslim, and a pagan. That I say that if it's all of that, it's none of that. He further said that religion is personal and the state is for all. Because he said that in his country, everybody pay tax. Christians, Muslims, and non-Christians. So the state is for all. Ethiopia is for all. Ethiopia is not for particular religious group. Otherwise, it divides the nation if the king is seen to be taking a side. So now the Rastafari movement, the part they failed to transcend is to transcend religion as the emperor transcended religion and place himself above all this religion, or diplomatically kind of like rejected that. But when by the look of things, you find that it is more of spiritual grounding than religious alignment. So yeah, the Rastafari movement, in short, as it stands, you have what we call the Rastafari and the Christafari, and they get very angry when I say that, because these are the people who say who use Tafari, who use Christ to rationalize Tafari. They will say King Tafari, Rastafari is Christ in his kingly character. He's a returned Christ. He's the second coming of Jesus Christ. You understand? So now that became a problem. Now I started to say, but this is not Rastafari, then this is Christ Tafari. You are using Christ to rationalize Tafari. Your doctrine is grounded in Christology, not even Rastaology. You understand? So so they take a great exception. They get offended by that. But we're in the business of decolonization. Who get offended, but the truth must be passed on. And it's not that we think our way is the only way. No, our way is just another way. Just like they saw that their way is that way of the Christian way, but it's self-defeating, because they find themselves hating things that the Christians hate about Africa. They hate things that the colonialists hate about Africa. They have issues with traditional healers. They have issues with Okpahla. They have issues with certain things that are emanating from African expressions like Ubuntu and so forth. So therefore even as a response to colonialism and slavery, but it becomes part of problems. It's not part of the solution to African problem. So it doesn't fully respond to colonialism and slavery as it's supposed to.
I note how everything keeps going back to the Bible, actually, because it's been the one book that has that was used to colonize us, and it continues to. So even the whatever movements we make towards decolonizing our spirit, it still revolves around the Bible.
Yes.
And One, also because the people that wrote the Bible as well were very smart in setting it in Africa. That is why we're always going to gravitate towards it being the center of religion and of spirituality. We need to come to a point where we actually understand religion and as opposed to spirituality, and understand that when we get into spaces that seek to limit or control our spirituality, we're already going into a religious space or into a cultist space, you know, and that is the danger with us, because we are so used to having leaders. So also in spirituality, we're always looking to have somebody that is a leader. So it's very easy to gravitate towards then worshipping the pastor or worshipping the whoever it is that is actually teaching and leading that space. And also that goes to also worshipping the king, because that is actually our mind frames is about worship. It's about always being lesser than. And we do not appreciate the fact that you lead only in the role that you are supposed to be leading in, but that we are all leaders in our own small spaces.
Leadership does not mean dominion or domination. And this is the problem that most have made. Even from the fundamental concept of God, God is not an object of worship. It's an object of identity. We identify with that. We are God having a human experience right now. We are spirit having a human experience. So we are God, all of us. We are part of the God energy. It's like everything there is. We are everything that there is. We ourselves.
Yes.
So now the mistake was made on the God concept. The mistake was made on the Christ concept. The Christ never said people should worship him. If you read it for yourself, he actually is telling people that they can even do more things than him, because he said, with faith you can do more than I am, what I did. You can do more than me. You can tell the mountain to move. Now you look at all the miracles of Christ, from turning water into wine to the last miracle, which is to rise from the dead according to Christology. He has never moved a mountain, but he's telling you that with your faith you can tell the mountain to move. Now it goes to any other space, whether these spaces of chematology, where the leader of the space is transformed into a cultic leader. It is lack of that, because you see, I am you sitting there, you are you sitting me. I am because you are, therefore you are, we are. It's Ubuntu. We find our individuality in our collective. We don't find our individuality in our individualism. Individualism is a new thing. We were always a collective.
Capitalism and colonization.
Yes, we have always been a collective people. So I can follow you. I can follow your teaching without reducing myself lesser than who I am, because I see me in you. There are things I identify in you that they build me. So hence I follow you. But now your job is to make sure that you don't forget. There was an emperor, a Roman emperor, is one Roman philosopher called Marcus Aurelius. Now Marcus Aurelius always had a slave. When he's speaking and talking and rousing the people up, he always had a slave behind him who always chanting this mantra that, remember that you are a man. Remember thou art a man. Remember, you are nothing but a man. So even if you are hyped up by all these energies that you are receiving, everybody's praising you, you must still remember that you are a man. So now we lack that voice behind us that said, remember, but you are a man. I can be all this Thau-Thau. I am a product of my environment. I have a personal library of 500 books. I read like a madman. I'm self-taught. I'm an organic intellectual. I've been to 18 countries studying and learning and teaching. I study forever. I learn also from Zanemvula. I'll watch her videos just to get some inspiration. I learn from everybody. So I become what I become because I'm open to absorbing knowledge and to sharing knowledge and to engage in the knowledge space. So for many people, I'm like, wow, this guy, you know, I've been seeing myself trending on TikTok. Everybody's like, wow, this is something else. You understand? But it's because I trained myself. I socialized myself that way. There's nothing extraordinary about this. There's nothing that I did that nobody can do if you give yourself time to do it. If you study, you will turn out extraordinary in your own special way. So my point here is that all of these great people that we have, they are no different from us ordinary people. So therefore we should not worship them. We should not elevate them to the level of a cultic leader, because therein lies all abuse. You can check all histories of cults, whether Jamestown, that famous cult story, the man just burning the people in the church. Some cult leaders have told the people that on the 24th of December the world is going to an end. People commit suicide and all of that. We need to move away from that, because once we create this cultic relationship with the leaders or people or messengers or whoever are there to shed light, and then we start to worship them as gods, and elevate them to the level of demigods, then we are in the danger of creating a situation where we will be abused by these characters. And this is what we are seeing in the churches today. The pastors are doing anything they want with the congregation, because the congregations have elevated them to the level of a demigod, not even a god. Because if we are going to go to the straight God concept, God is not to be worshipped. I once had a reason with my Muslim brother. We are together in the cannabis space, and then he was like softly, nicely trying to convert me to Islam. I said to him, okay, the spirit in the church, they said it's a Holy Spirit. In the laboratory we call it oxygen. Let's deal with it scientifically as something that is in the laboratory. Do you think oxygen is worried that I don't worship it? Do you think that the oxygen, wherever it is right now, that I'm
even in case,
and I'm inhaling and exhaling it all the time? Do you think oxygen is sitting there worried? Now, this is how you should think of Holy Spirit. This is how you should think of God, of Mudimu. Let me take it now to the languages of our people, Serona, Sarona, Karona, our indigenous language. Mudimu is not an object of worship in our African culture. That is why we never had temples of worship. We only have shrines of ancestors. And the ancestors too, we don't worship them. There is no African word for ancestor worship. Okpahla doesn't mean to worship the ancestors. Pabadimu doesn't mean to worship ancestors. Musevetsi wabadimu doesn't mean to worship ancestors. Any of the African words that we use in relation to Amadlozi. Basically, this relationship we have with Amadlozi is a true homage that we pay to Abakhulu bethu. No worship. So worship, praise and worship is not African, whether in the church or kumadlozi. So we don't do that. Or could these new age movements of Kimet, Ubungoma, Africology, Africanity, Afrocentricity, all these movements that are coming up, because it is a time now, it's time for Africanism. So Africa will rise, Africa will be free. Africa, it is time to be free, it will rise. But the process of rise, we must be careful that we don't repeat what our colonizers done. And this is what we are seeing now with the black Christians, that they're doing what the white missionaries did when they brought Christianity here. They debased our people. They treated them in the most horrible way. Some get excommunicated. Those who were strong enough, they went out and created their black version of these churches, like these black Christianities that we have, like Oshembe, ZCC and what. Some of them are a result of racism in the white church. So for them to adjust and continue in that particular spirit of the church, they went and make their own churches. Like, for instance, the story of Nehemiah Dile. 1883, he established the Tembu Church among the Tembu people, the Xhosa people. Why? There was an initiation ceremony for Dalinyebo, King Dalinyebo. So, as a Xhosa man, he felt obligated, although he's he's a Christian priest, he felt obligated to contribute to that initiation. So he offered a bull that was slaughtered for the homecoming of Dalinyebo. So the white missionaries were so incensed about that thing. They said, oh, you are a Christian, but you still participate in your pagan rituals, in your heathen rituals, your African rituals. So as a result, he broke away from them and said, from now on, I'm establishing the Tembu Church. As the King of England is the head of the English church, the Anglican church. So the king of the Tembu will be the head of the Tembu Church. That's why the Tembu Church was established. In 1892, they established the Ethiopian Church of South Africa. Mangena Mugoni, they break up with the Wesley missionaries because of racism in the church. So this is where the African Christianity come in. But also with the question of our traditional healers went through serious, there was a period of witch hunt where hence this tradition of ours, they call it witchcraft because they demonize it and they classify it as witchcraft, and there was a witch hunt. Now for them to adjust, some had to go into the church. Kube is tunywa, understand? Kube omu prophet. You know, that is why today some people will be telling that bayatwasa, but batwasa nesi is tunya or into dimani nesonto. But this was our adjustment in those stages, that you find that going 3 generations backward, our ancestors bagzala ngepiga and cross and all of that, because these were traditional healers. I mean, straight example is my father. I come from a long line of traditional healers, both on my mother and my father's side. My father is the first one to become a Christian in the family. My people specialize with 3 things: rainmaking, divination, and initiation of boys into men. Now, my father, because he had this gift from his father, who were rainmakers, who were diviners, who were initiators, he has to pick and choose now the things that he will go with them into the church. The spirit is the spirit of his ancestors. It's not a spirit of the Bible or of Christianity. It's a spirit of his ancestors, but he has to camouflage it into the church. And they find some affinities, particularly the Old Testament. That is why you'll find that most of this African Christianity, they identify a lot with Old Testament, because therein you find the prophets. So therefore, Inyanga, when it get into the church, become a prophet, you know, and it tried to model themselves according to the Old Testament prophet, the Elijahs and the Jeremiahs and the Isaiahs, and they find some things.
The rituals,
similarities. So now that is another thing again, that similarities don't mean sameness, and this is where our people have been confusing themselves, that because you find certain similarities in the Bible, therefore you say the Bible is ours. It's not. There are similarities. Ancient indigenous cultures have similarities from South America. Ancient pre-Christian cultures have a lot of similarities, whether it be on their ancestral system, whether it be on their spiritual system itself. They have a lot of similarities. And ancient mythologies had a lot of reference to Africa. It is not only the Bible that that mentioned Egypt about 100 times and Ethiopia about 40 times. Therefore, because we see Ethiopia and Egypt mentioned in the Bible, let's leave Israel out. These 2 first, Egypt and Ethiopia, because Israel, it is in the Middle East. People will argue it differently. Okay. But these ones that are in the continent, it is not the Bible or the book of mythology that make mention of these 2 countries. Not the first. The Greek mythologies, Homer, Herodotus, all these people, even earlier mythologies that before the Bible, they've always make reference to Africa. It's a continent of the gods. It's a land of spirituality. It's all began here. The one time a doctor in the United States made a placenta analysis of 140 something women, Dr. Rebecca Ken, in 1994. She made a placenta analysis of 140 something women to determine the common origin of all females around the world. 140 something females of all racial groups and whatever. So the only way to determine a common origin of all of us is through an organ that is only found in the body of a woman, which is the placenta. So through the framework of mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. So she did a placenta analysis of these 140 odd women men, and they come up with a conclusion that all females come from one woman who lived in Central Africa about 300,000 years ago. And when the white people wrote about it in the Time magazine of 1994 as a breaking story, they said the African Eve. So what they do is they biblicize a knowledge, African knowledge. This woman is 294,000 years older than Eve. But you are using Eve. Eve is 6,000 years ago. You are using Eve. Adam and Eve is 6,000 years ago. All theologians agree. I was telling Zane earlier that when I was studying in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church theology, they say Adam was born in 4004 BC on the 26th of October. In 4004 BC, which makes Adam 6,000 years old, which makes the Bible story the creation story according to the Bible 6,000 years old, lesser than most of the stories of creation, lesser than even the stories of evolution. So they take a 6,000 years old woman and they use her as a prototype of 300,000 years ago woman. They say the African Eve. When they find the bone of the oldest man in Africa, they say the African Adam. So they use the Bible to colonize us. They use the biblical to colonize even knowledge. Remember that colonialism, they did not only colonize the land and the spaces we live in. They colonize ideas, they colonize principles, they colonize concepts that we use. Hence today, black people will think when you say culture, talk about something that is specifically black. White people don't have culture, they have civilization. Blacks have culture. White people don't have tribes, they have nations. Blacks have tribes. But even the word tribe is not African. And its origin is not even originating in Africa. It's originating in Europe. It was referring to the three groups that were fighting the Roman Empire. The Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the Heruli. So when the Romans call them collective, they say tribe. It's tri-stri, like Trinity, trilateral, triune, any three-sided thing. So they will then therefore grouped together as tribe. Now, to say Swati is a tribe is a misnomer. You will need three ethnic groups to have a tribe. You'll need maybe Swati, Zulu, Xhosa, then you'll have a tribe. And then maybe you can say Nguni tribe. But Nguni is not a tribe. It's a nation beyond a tribe, among Nguni. You see, so therefore, we find that dichotomy that we need to deal with as we are moving in our process of decolonization, that we have to decolonize concepts, we have to decolonize ideas, we have to decolonize principles. You see, when the Europeans colonized us, they had a conference called the Berlin Conference.
They sat down around the table.
1884, 3 months, 15 days. They sit there to colonize us all spheres of our social existence, religiously, economically, politically, and so forth. They took their time. And that is why we must not take the process of decolonization as a simple thing. It is going to be long. It is going to be all-inclusive. It must be holistic. You can't use one particular institute. I will teach people in my institute and refer them to Zane, and then Zane refer them to you, and you refer them to others in order to have the total picture. But it's not going to take one particular institute or one particular individual to do the whole thing, because it did not take an individual to come up with our colonization. It took 10 European superpowers, 3 months, 15 days, and then thereafter they sign a Berlin Pact that they're not going to interfere with one another in the process of colonizing us.
I like that you are very positive about Africa being free. Africa will be free only if Africans decolonize their minds and their spirits. And that is actually the biggest challenge, in that even as we understand that we are colonized, we are not able to move from the colonial concepts and the colonial principles, and that is how we're living our life. Look at us now. Look at you and I dressed in the way that we're dressed in the workspaces, because capitalism is a big thing in our lives now. In also moving forward, because everybody wants to move ahead economically as well, and so that becomes our tripping point.
Yes.
This is where we actually fail, because even as we actually understand, understand that we're colonized. We still spend too much time in those capitalist spaces, because we're looking after our pockets, and now that puts us at a disadvantage, that we cannot actually get out of being colonized, because that space itself is just colonized. When each time you walk into the office, you're actually walking into the space that is no longer yours, a space in which colonialism still reigns, So that is one thing that is actually going to deter us. And also, not only that, our children, we place our children in schools, and the schools are colonized spaces as well. So we hand our children over to a place where into spaces where their mindsets are already being colonized from 4 years old, when we actually hand them over. So that is actually the critical spaces in which we actually need to be able to come into. How then are we going to, in your view, how do you see us moving away and getting to a point where we say Africa is free?
Well, you see, this is our problem, that we're sending our children to the Romans and we wonder why they behave like Caesar. We send them to Babylon and we wonder how they behave like Nebuchadnezzar. It is because we need to take charge of our education. Again, Africans, we are the only people who allow our enemy or our colonizers to educate our children. Now we need to homeschool, number one. We need to develop a concept of homeschooling. Number two, we need to develop decolonized schools. If we're not doing homeschooling, we must now begin to build institutions, and which is the failure of our government, that post 1994 it did not invest in de-apartheidizing our education. Before, those of us who went to school before 1994, we had to study a thing called Bantu education, an education specifically designed for a black child, so that it can make us docile, it can make us subservient, it can make us these people who were educated for job seeking. We're not educated for job creation. That is why today you'll find an unemployed graduate with a diploma or degree in business management is given incentive to create a business, but is waiting for somebody to employ them. Now, salary is a bribe they give us to forget our dreams. Salary is a drug they give us to forget our dreams and build somebody else's dreams. Because once you get into that spaces of the big salaries and so forth, you have no time for yourself. You have no time to build your dreams. You have your own dreams. So you're paid to build somebody's dreams. And when you come back Saturday after lunch, for those who work Monday to Saturday until 1 o'clock, you have little time to yourself to manifest your dreams. Then you rest, you do what you have to do quick, and then Sunday you go to church for more zombification, you understand, and then Monday back to the grind.
And you get paid, and you're happy to be able to take your child to Curo, and you're thinking you're doing the best for your child, because I'm taking my child to a private school for education. When in actual fact you're taking your child to a very expensive colonization space, and that what is going to be created of your child is going to come out to be a similar slave like you, will be going to an office, or who will be looking, if they're lucky, for to actually even be, who will be even be lucky if they can actually even get into those spaces, because as we can see, that also is getting limited. We have so many people, our universities are churning out graduates every year, and we have, and Cyril Ramaphosa or let me not leave children out of it. We have no jobs, no new jobs being made. So even that one, you can see that we're actually heading for the wall. We're going to be hitting the wall if we have not already. If you look at the unemployment rate currently, we've already hit the wall. So even that is no longer sustainable. So that space is killing us. And that is where I'm coming into when you say you are so hopeful that Africa will be free. We need to free Africa from the start, from where we are bringing up our children. How are we doing that? We're speaking about homeschooling. Even when we homeschool our children, we homeschool them and they still need to sit exams in that syllabus that is set by the government. That is also the syllabus for colonization. So do you understand?
Yes.
So even our homeschooling systems are tricky.
Yes.
What it does, it takes the child away from going to school, but we're teaching them the same thing. So what we need is and we cannot do this without the government, unfortunately, because we can create a syllabus. I can decide that this is what my children need to learn. I want them to learn Black history. I want them to learn Africanism. This is how I'm going to bring them up. This is what they are going to eat. I want them to eat organic foods grown on the land. We don't have the land. You know, I want them to, and so when I have created that, where are my children going to exist? What am I doing? Because the majority of South Africa is not doing that, or the majority of Southern Africa is not doing that. So I'm already setting up my children to be outcasts. I'm already setting them up to not be able to compete in the capitalist space or economic space as it is. So my children, I'm already setting them up for failure. So by this, I want you to tell me why you believe that Africa will be free.
We have to redesign the whole system. We have to redefine priorities, our priorities. We were conditioned to believe that when you speak a perfect English, it's a mark of intelligence, which it is not. It's a mark of linguistic ability. You're just able to traverse from one language to another. The Chinese, they don't need to speak a perfect English in order to design a cell phone. Or their children to make computers and all of that. The Indians, they don't need to speak perfect English in order to advance technologically. Now, we need to understand that English is not a language of design and innovation. So we need to be innovative, design the things. Up to so far, we are still a consumer race by the standard of many, we Africans, that we consume what we don't make. You know, a whole lot of things that we have, we don't make them. We don't make our cars, we don't make our cell phones, we don't make anything of essential to us.
That's why we need to go to work.
That's why we need to go to work to do that. That is why they'll tell you that a black middle class is 3 months away from poverty. If the black middle class is unemployed or is fired, within 3 months is in poverty. They repossess whatever they have.
You're home, you're back in the street.
Yeah, you're back in the street. You understand? Now, we need to move away from a consumer race to a creative race. Black ignorance is a mega billion-dollar industry. There were statistics that show that just with fake hair and fake nails in America, they make $7 billion a year out of black people. Out of black people. So it's black ignorance, you know, it's a mega billion-dollar industry. Once we understand that part, that the things that we need to design them ourselves. Now, what are our needs? We don't have our own so-called Maslow pyramid of needs. We need to have that. We need to have our own pyramid of needs for survival. We need to map out this thing, that what are essentials of our survival? These are our essentials. We'll need shelter, we'll need food, we'll need transportation, we'll need communication, we'll need this. Then, how do we design this thing for ourselves? And stop having these PhDs who are congregating there at Capellos and news cafes and telling you where they got their degree from Harvard and what, and while their mothers are drinking and their grandmothers in the rural areas are drinking waters with the goats in the same rivers, where they're supposed to be making water reticulation machines. So we need to invent. So we're not inventors, number one. We need to come up with a liberation ideology that is ours. We don't need to go and borrow communism, democracy, and all of these things, because our liberators are schooled in this foreign doctrine that don't seems to have worked for Africa from 1958 when Ghana gained independence until 1994 when South Africa gained its own independence. These things hasn't worked. Ghana at best is producing a lot of con priests, con artists who are building churches all around this country and impoverishing the poor communities even more. Instead of Ghana importing and exporting Pan-Africanists like Kwame Nkrumah, instead of one African country bringing in innovators, we either having drug dealers who are running brothels around, giving young South African girls drugs, and in other countries too, drugs, get them into prostitution, pimping them. So we have a whole lot of movement of Africans. Even this, I think South Africa is even currently as it stands, it's a bad experiment and a bad example of Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism at its failed state is what you see here. Yuval alone, there are 44 African countries staying there. But how is the state of Yuval? It is worse. It is one of the most unsafe places. You get marked there, you get stepped. We even know crime is committed according to nationalities. You know that this particular nationality is specialized with mugging and stabbing. This particular nationality is specialized with drugs and all of this. This particular nationality is specialized with fraud and everything. These are crimes and impoverishment inflicted upon the fellow Africans. So that means there need to be a total shift in a mindset. When people like Julius Malema are talking about opening the borders and all of that, we must first change the mind so that when you're going to have a free flow of goods and people and everything, is essentials, is essential people, is people who are essential to our development. Like we are told today that the whole of Africa is entitled to be in South Africa because for 30 years we were exiled. When we ran away from apartheid, we stayed everywhere in the continent. But when I'm a former freedom fighter, I stayed in Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania. I can tell you that with fact and certainty that when we stay in those countries, we were not running spaza shops and selling fake goods. When we were staying in those countries, we were not selling drugs.
We're in refugee camps.
We're in refugee camps and military camps and schools. For those who were students, they were in schools. For those who were soldiers, like ourselves, who were trained, I was in Mutopeng Military College in Bagamoyo in a camp, malaria infested camp, you know. Or refugee camps like Dukwe in Botswana, where you were given 1 tin of fish for a day as a refugee. We were not even well subsidized, even by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. We're not well subsidized. We're not well taken care of. That today you have people who claim to be economic refugees and political refugees, and every festive season they still go back to their countries and come back. How can a political asylum seeker have holidays and they still go back to the country run away from?
Yeah.
You see, so they're playing a whole lot of is because South Africa is trying to be what no African country is. South Africa is the only country they say South Africa belongs to all who live in it. Zimbabwe is for the Zimbabweans. Mozambique is for the Mozambique. Even countries that you will steal nothing from, that you overstay, they arrest you, they deport you. It's not like you're going to gain anything. It doesn't have social grants like here. It doesn't have social welfare. It's not a welfare state like South Africa, where unemployed are given that little 350, which we know it doesn't do anything. But you don't get a country like that. You understand? So it is a problem. Our brand of Pan-Africanism is not working. It's toxic. It work against the South African. So I'm not being xenophobic. I'm a Pan-Africanist. But this is not a Pan-Africanism that we are dealing with now. It is something completely strange. It is actually, if it's Pan-Africanism, is a predatory Pan-Africanism. It's a parasitical Pan-Africanism, which is sucking the blood of South Africans. I mean, we come from a great depression of apartheid. The gates are open, the legal opportunities that are there, instead of they going to the indigenous, then they're going to those who say we are indebted to them. They liberated us. But the question is, how come it took 53 countries 30 years to liberate one country? If the whole of Africa that is here did participate in our liberation, how come it took them so long to liberate us? Is it something to be proud of, that allow you to come and now mess up a country? Because you did assist these people. By which way? In Botswana, we did not have a military camp, and the Botswana police will arrest you if you pass there with AK-47s to come and fight here. In Zimbabwe, we did not have a military camp. There are few countries that we had military camps. That is why our liberation took long. And one of them that sacrificed for us is Mozambique. They even lost their president, Samora Machel. You understand? Swaziland, we were passing in and out with our guns, fine. You understand? But Lesotho were coming in and out, and they had to bear the brand. Every now and then there was raid, the Maseru raid, the Matola raid in Mozambique. A whole lot of kidnapping took place in Swaziland. Abduction.
They called it Beirut.
Beirut. It was Beirut, right? So, but can we talk the same about Malawi, which was the first country to open an embassy for apartheid South Africa in 1972, when no country was having an embassy for apartheid South Africa, where you could not pass with your dreadlocks. You have to cut, Kamuzu Banda will cut your hair. Just even when you are in transit, you are not just staying. You had a particular hairstyle that is required and all that. So not all Africa participated in the liberation of Africa, of South Africa. So therefore this mindset have to change, because the current mindset, we are hopeful that Africa will be free, but it will be long. It will take long, because we still have to change the mind and to set it in the process of liberation, not the process of manipulation that we are dealing with now. How many of our African brothers and sisters who are here are contributing to further decolonizing South Africa from neo-apartheid? Nobody. Actually, they're coming to repeat the same thing the Boers used to say. They are saying South Africans are lazy. But this is what the Boers were saying before 1994, that we are lazy. But who built South Africa? Who was mining the mines? Who was cleaning the suburbs? The whites, they say they can't trust us. But our mothers were taking care of their children and cooking for them. The whites, they said we are lazy, but we built all these roads, all this. There's nothing like South Africa in Africa in terms of infrastructure development. Well developed. Even those who come and say South Africans are lazy, how are you coming to enjoy a well-built country by lazy people? So there are contradictions even among the black narratives and the African narrative. So our narrative is not liberation narrative. It's about capitalist accumulation, predatory capitalist accumulation, Western crass materialism, and that itself is a serious problem, because whether it's the pastors with their tent that are mushrooming everywhere, and it's a pity in South Africa, religion is not regulated, so these priests do whatever they want, and which is tantamount to money laundering, drug trafficking, human trafficking. All type of criminality is committed here. Again, you have also a weak security system, and our intelligence system, it is checking who wants to remove Cyril Ramaphosa, and then the next one will become president. The intelligence will be more focused on who wants to remove Paul Mashatile. Understand? Our intelligence is not watching who's bringing dangerous things in this country. Our immigration system, you pass there. I pass a lot at Beitbridge going to Africa. I travel a lot with buses, so my port of entry and exit is by Beitbridge, because I'm in Limpopo, then it's easier. You pass Beitbridge, there are about 20 buses per day entering this country, and half of those people are undocumented, and some of them have expired passport. What they need to do to enter here, they put 100 rand in a passport and give it to the immigration officer, and that 100 rand is going to commit a lot of crime through that 100 rand.
It's not bringing
any development. So now, in terms of developmental consciousness, we have a lot to do. We need to have a lot of decolonization movement, schools mushrooming, both by South Africans. We're not forbidding free movement of Africans. We have good Pan-Africanists in Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda. Those are the type of people we need to have to come into these spaces to help to decolonize. Not the best thugs and the best con men the continent has ever produced to come around and rob the already impoverished people who are dispossessed people, and then your fellow Africans come to dispossess you. Some they're latching on your desperation. You know, you'll get an SMS, they said you have won this, send this, and then you send your numbers or your email, they con you more. You understand? We don't need that in order to free Africa. So the other things we Africans again is that we're the only people who have traitors in our liberation movement. Now, when we talk of our liberation, we must also talk of the cost of our liberation. You know, in China, Mao Zedong has to exterminate about 60 million people for China to be what it is. How many no-gooders do we need to get rid of? Whether exterminate them, whether jail them, whether send them to rehabilitation camps or wherever. But we need to do something about the traitors of our race. And these traitors of our race come in different ways. They come in the form of these pastors who are coming to con already the impoverished people. They come in the form of the drug dealers who are spreading the street with drugs. We have brilliant people on Nyaupe. There's another one who was trending on TikTok for speaking good English, Bonga Sitole. Was going around and a wonderful lady went and picked him up, tried to rehabilitate him, dress him up, get a job for him, take him to rehab. He ran away from rehab, he go to the street, he realized that he's a trending hobo. He's now trending everywhere, people come to him. You understand? He's addicted to this Nyaupe. But we never had this high level of Nyaupe addictions where wonderful South African girls and boys are now addicts of this and they're becoming counterproductive.
Yet you say Africa will be free.
And yet we say Africa will be free. So how are we going to free Africa? We need to change the mindset. Decolonization of the mind, what we said before. We need to have these schools, this institute like Afro-Savvy Healing Institute, mushrooming in numbers. We need to make sure that our major curriculum is decolonization, is liberation philosophy and liberation ideology that is practical. We need to make sure that we write a lot, we publish a lot, we document a lot. We say this uncomfortable truth, this inconvenient truth a lot until they become our common truth. We need to understand that we are in a mess and we need to clean up that mess for us before we liberate. Otherwise, we are going to pour a new wine in an old bottle. So it means that our liberation is not going to be a walk in the park. A lot of sacrifices need to be made. A lot of struggling needs to be made, because now this is a second phase of our liberation where we are now going to be battling with ourselves, not with the white colonizers. I always say that we are fighting for liberation from our liberators. In the context of Rastafari, that we still go to jail. We have about 235 prisons in this country, and all those prisons you get the Rastafari there. What are they arrested for? For ganja. From 2018, ganja is legal. Is decriminalized. You have more white people who are into that space. You have cannabis exposed, that we see them is only exposition of whites. You will be surprised the amount of white people who are into the Daha space now.
I'm not surprised.
You see, and they have their 420 cafes, they have their farms. What they did is they just converted white privilege. You know, they had the farms. So these farms are no more farming maize, are farming Daha. Is a new thing now. It is doing a whole lot of
because they have the land.
Because they have the land.
And getting the licenses is easier for white people than it is for black people. The
Exactly.
growing license.
They got licenses. The other time I get information that there are about 33 licenses issued in this country, and only one is a black female, and then the rest of 32 is white people who have those licenses. Now also, the government, those black people, they give them land or farms. They don't subsidize them like the apartheid government used to do. They used to subsidize farmers. So even if we complain about land, we are given a land now, they say, fine, we give you 1,000 acres among yourself, share it among 10 of you in Zanige. With no subsidy, with no investment, with no some development bank coming in and out, and some machineries provided to do a farming. and even training for farming, like take people to agriculture schools and they be qualified farmers, because we still do indigenous farming, which is largely dependent on rain. But we need a farming that is dependent on irrigation, no rain and all of that. Irrigation, that is commercial farming. So we're not even
food security.
We are not even capacitated. As much as people will mock us and say, I hear our fellow Zimbabwean patriots, they will say, you South African, Mandela left you with poems. We, Mugabe, left us with land. But they're not telling you that they are giving back the land to the whites, or they're selling the land back because they can't do anything with the land. That land reposition does not go with subsidization and to make them viable commercial farmers. So some, they're just sitting with the land, and some, they've left the land and come into South Africa now to do all type of jobs that they are doing. So what is the point there of having a land and not having the ability to develop it? So we have a long way to go for us to be free, but we are going to be free. Africa will be free. And
Africa will be free. Africa will be free.
Omkulu Credo Motor prophesied. There's even a passage in Indaba, my children, I'll show it to you, where he said, but he's talking about 5,000 years to come. You know, that the essence of evil, which is our colonization and enslavement, will be defeated and Africa will be free again. A Zulu woman will give birth, by the name of Nozala, will give birth to Uluzwi, Mundi, the word, who will then, with Lumukanda, help to liberate us. It might sound like our legends, our fairy tales, our mythology, but it's a natural progression. Nothing remains permanent in the world. Nothing remains permanent. Our enslavement is not permanent. Our colonization is not permanent. Our brainwash, our mental slavery is not permanent. There was a time we were not colonized, we were not enslaved, we were not brainwashed. So there will be a time when we will not be brainwashed. We are living in a world that is cyclical. Those who are on top will be on the bottom, and so forth. There was a time we were in the bottom, on top of the world. We were once a superpower. We had about four golden age before we reach into this dark age that we are in before. So we will be free, but it will come with efforts. Freedom doesn't come free. So now we need to begin to count the cost of that freedom. What are the costs? What will it take for us to be free? Now, we haven't talked about the cost of it because we fantasize about our liberation, that we'll be free. Just like it is clear that we South Africans, before 1994, we fantasize about free South Africa. We did not think about it. Even the ANC, they did not have an idea that once they take over, what's going to happen?
Then what?
Yeah. Oliver Tambo once said, it is easy to fight a liberation struggle, to fight a liberation war, but it's difficult to govern a free country. And we are, and the 28 years of democracy, or this experiment of the sunset clause that we are dealing with now, has proven that, because we are having a government that has looted a lot of resources that must go towards our decolonization. They know that at Codesa, at Groote Schuur, at Pretoria Minute, they did not negotiate a full freedom. Now they should have taken a responsibility and said that the next phase is going to be the liberation of our mind. So what are institutions they're going to put in place? They didn't. They become one of the biggest materialists, the biggest material expression and display of wealth. We see it from our liberators. It's the comrades who are wearing the most expensive belt, they're drinking the most expensive alcohol. You understand? They're doing
while their mothers are starving. That is so true. And also, you said that we were not always slaves. We were not always colonized. We were not always the way that we are now. And also, towards Africa being free, I want to say that we were not always able to sit around the table and sit like this and speak about our situation.
Do
you understand?
Yeah.
We were not able to sit around and speak freely about our spirituality. There were acts around that.
Yes.
So that is actually progression in the right direction. But also, having said that, you say again that it's going to take a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice, it's going to take us going back and deciding that this is actually what we want. I want to put it to us as South Africans or Africans in Southern Africa, that not only is it going to take a lot of work, we need to already be preparing for it happening. If we are going to stand here and sit here and confidently say that South Africa or Africa will be free, we need to prepare for that freedom. We need to plan for how we're actually going to get there. It should not be by crisis, because just South Africa alone, we are heading, okay, the rest of Africa, of Southern Africa, is crisis level. We can see that. South Africa, crisis again as well. We see in our roads, we see in employment. So already the system that was put in place is no longer working. So it's there. It's being supported by everything that the government has, and because our government subscribes still to our colonizer, so that becomes a problem. But we can see that it's no longer working. So we need to be preparing for the time where it all falls apart, because it is falling apart. Slowly but surely falling apart. So that now gives me the confidence that indeed Africa is going to be free at some point. But in it being free, again, like you say, that even the ANC was not ready. We were just dreaming about freedom from apartheid, and it happened, and they were not ready for it. We then need to be readying ourselves for that time. We need to, before the falling apart, when everything is falling apart, we need to have structures in place to actually support us and make us make the fall not so hard. Something that will cushion us, because the fall is happening. It's already happening. That's why we speak of the unemployment rate. That's why we speak of we spoke about how our universities are churning out graduates, but there's nowhere to place these graduates. So that's why we have now people on Nyawope. That's why we actually even have more people submitting themselves to prostitution. We have more people submitting themselves to crime and being employed by foreign drug lords. And these are our people that are now being employed and selling for the drug lords. So we can see that it is falling apart. So we need those structures. Like you say, we need to be, it should not just be only a spiritual based thing. It should also be not only just political, but it should be something that will cushion us. It will cushion our children, because you and I are on our way out. So I see Africa will be free. And what are we going to do, you and I,
to prepare for
that freedom when the freedom comes? And it's a challenge not only for you and I, it's a challenge that I'm placing with everybody that is actually listening to us, especially leaders. Especially leaders in decolonizing, because we're not going to speak about the leaders in government. Those are busy making money. Those are busy having a good life. We're speaking about they are making money, and they think that their children will be cushioned with what they're going to be keeping in their coffers. But when this thing falls apart, even if they don't have it under their couch, it's going to go with the system.
No, definitely. Like we talked about the Berlin Conference, the process of our colonization, that it took 3 months, 15 days. I always say that we need the African Berlin Conference, because usually our conferences of decolonization or Pan-Africanist or any form of Africanism, even now, if we can sit now and say, Gogo, let's plan a decolonization conference, it will not last more than 7 days. And if it does go for 7 days, after 4 days, people will be fatigued and want to do shopping. The delegates want to see around what they're going to shop for their girlfriends and all of that after they leave. People will be fatigued and sleeping. Or even our method of discourse is still colonized. We'll bring about 100 speakers, giving each one of them 15 minutes to speak, and then after the fifth speaker finished speaking, you've forgotten what did the first speaker said.
Which is what our government is doing.
Well, it's what our government is doing. That's why they say seminars. That's why they say South Africa, we are over-lectured, over-workshopped, over-seminared country. We have seminars every week, workshop every week, conference every week. We chow the bulk of our budget. But what are the results? They're not bringing any result. So when I say we need to have our Berlin conference, I mean to say we need to sit and look at all activities of our social existence. How do we liberate ourselves economically or decolonize economics to make them work for us, that we are not a consumer race. They say the Jews, the money in the Jewish community, it circulates among them 10 times before it leaves the community. Money in our community, it circulates once and gone. And I can tell you, even with my own kids, when I reach there, one of them likes say, Papa, rand, Papa, 2 rand. Immediately after you give it to him, he's going to my friend's shop to buy. No concept of saving, understand? But this is a dilemma of all of us. Most of us, we get money, the next thing is getting out of the community. I'm not sitting here and thinking, okay, I need an ankh, let me go to Gogo and buy an ankh from Gogo. And Gogo will go and buy the beads from Gogo Zanemvula.
And Gogo Zanemvula will go buy spinach and shiba from the mage in the corner.
Exactly. We don't work like that. So we need to work our economic plan. We need to work our education plan, that we come up with an education system that make us first be comfortable in our own skin. Second, be innovative. An education that is going to create jobs creators than job seekers. Therefore, we don't find ourselves that as woke, as conscious as we are, we're still producing children who are going to seek employment from Babylon system. And then we wonder why they behave like Nebuchadnezzar, because that is where they spend most of their time at. So we need to work on our spiritual system. We need to be very comfortable with our own spirituality. From you are a Umswati, find out from the ways of Mvelinga. Find out and resonation with that. We don't have to do even our African spirituality. Look, we're getting out of our Bantu, immediate Bantu here. We're running to Kemet. You're living the same thing that gave essence to Kemet. Kemet come from here. The Bantu knowledge system, it come from the Bantu knowledge. And they say, so the ancient Egyptian themselves, they say, we come from the beginning of the Nile. We come from the mountains of the moon. Now, the beginning of the Nile is in the heart of Africa, in Central Africa.
But we are also now rushing to understand Kemet without understanding
our immediate spirituality that
actually built Kemet.
That actually built Kemet. People, they go Ashe, which is Akan, West African, right? But we have Ashe in Sepedi.
I was going to say that.
We have Ashe in Stonga is Ahe. Papa Penny Ahe, you understand? But what Papa Penny is saying when they say Ahe is what the woke are saying when they say Ashe, and what we say Kamaku, you understand? It's the same. So we need to understand that I can still say Kamaku and it's the same as the one who say Hotep.
I can say Togoza.
And Togoza is the same as one who's saying Hotep, because somehow you're trying to move away from saying Amen because it's been vulgarized by the Christian, but Amen is still African because it's Kemet. So now we need to decolonize even our spiritual outlook and our spiritual expressions. They are still very much colonized. So we are actually reproducing the same thing we're trying to run away from. We're trying to institutionalize spirituality. And once you institutionalize spirituality, you create a religion. Religion is an institutionalization of spirituality. You start to develop routine, dogmas and doctrine, and then you are going to develop cult leaders of that particular expression. So we need to develop a spiritual approach that says we are all gods, we are all spirits. If you come into this space, you are not less than. We must always be on that thing that is driven by Ubuntu, that I am because you are. I am because you are, all the time. Therefore we are. So that reciprocity that we need. Now, we need to decolonize our concept of entertainment, because these are all areas that were colonized. The 9 areas of our social activities. Our approach to love and sex, it needs to be decolonized. Sometimes I say to people, we are so colonized that we even having sex like white people. And then the first thing is like, how do we have sex like black people? I say, well, you'll find out for yourself. But the point here is that all areas of our social existence is being colonized, and therefore all areas of our social existence need to be decolonized. That is what we need to do. And therefore that began to establish a blueprint that me and you, and a template that me and you, we need to leave behind, because we are not going to be here when that day when Africa is free, but we are going to be here because our children are going to give birth to us again. Our immortality is in our offspring. The more we give birth and they give birth, this is a reproduction, this is genetic cloning, you know. So you gave birth to yourself, you understand, which she will reproduce herself in another, and so forth and so. This is where the concept of the ancestor come in. This is where we say in the person of the person there are many person. This is why when we greet you in plural, sanibonane, because we are greeting them in you. You are 33% your mother, 33% your father, 33% yourself. So in the 33% of your mother is your grandmother and her grandmother, and in the 33% of your father in you is her father and mother, and so forth and so forth. So when you sit here, you are the totality of all that was, which you are the actual representation of that. And then when you give birth, you are passing yourself into the next. That is our only way of immortality. We can't sit here for 2,000 years, but we will sit here by reproducing ourselves. So that is why in our African wisdom they say, we name our children by someone in the family, and when you call the name of the dead, you make them live again. So when we name someone after Umkhulu, we're bringing back Umkhulu, and we begin to see certain similarities and characteristics. So yeah, what uyafana no Rahulu Nzozodi, or uyafana no Rahulu Mamutieja, or understand. So we reproduce. Now we need to understand that. White people understand, they call it genetics and the genomes and the DNA system. So we need to understand genetics and genetic passing from one generation to the other in a decolonized space and in a liberatory space, that giving birth in a liberatory space, passing of genes in a liberatory space. Now we need to cover all areas of our social existence. There are no shortcuts. We must take the stairs. We're not going to take an elevator.